Okay, guys, so the Trump administration is now asking the Supreme Court to block a federal judge order that forces the White House to pay the SNAP benefits for November. If the court agrees, it would halt or delay food assistance for more than 42 million Americans, including millions of children, seniors, and veterans. A lower court ruled that the administration violated federal law by refusing to fund SNAP during the shutdown, saying that the money was already approved by Congress and it must be spent. Now, by appealing directly to the Supreme Court, Trump's team is arguing that the president has the power to withhold funds, even when Congress has already approved them. So here's the thing, guys. That claim directly conflicts with the 1975 Supreme Court ruling against Richard Nixon, which made it clear that the president cannot refuse to spend money approved by Congress. And if the court sides with Trump, it would give the White House sweeping new power to basically control federal spending and could leave millions of Americans without food as the shutdown continues.
Well, SCOTUS, once again, screwing over Americans. So they paused the earlier appeals court order that forced Trump to pay the full SNAP benefit. They paused it to give him time to get their argument together as to why they can't feed kids. That's so crazy to me. But this happened. He was appealing to the Supreme Court while he was actively working with states to fund it. So some of these states already funded their SNAP fully. Some did it on their own, but some were working with the administration to get the funding to pay it out. So it's just a clusterfuck. They don't know what they're doing. This administration is just totally incompetent.
What if I told you the Trump administration is literally asking the Supreme Court to stop food payments to millions of American families in the middle of a government shutdown? Wait, you already know that, don't you? So here's what's going on. A federal judge ordered the government to fully fund November SNAP benefits. That's food assistance for over 40 million people. But instead of just following that order, the Trump administration turned around and asked the Supreme Court to pause or block it. Their argument that the USDA doesn't have the authority to use certain emergency funds for these payments. Meanwhile, the USDA says they're trying to comply, but it could take weeks or even months for states to get that money. So families who rely on SNAP could see delays or smaller payments, all while politicians play legal chess over who deserves to eat. This isn't about budgets, it's about values. If a government can find billions for tax breaks and corporate bailouts, but has to ask permission to feed children, that's not fiscal responsibility. That's moral bankruptcy. But what do you think?
Quick breaking news for you this evening. The Republican majority Supreme Court of the United States has temporarily blocked the USDA from fully funding SNAP. If this sounds unfamiliar to you because of the government shutdown and how we weren't expecting funding for this anyway, let me give you some background. During a government shutdown, when funding for SNAP and WIC run out, it is not replenished until the government reopens. Well, several days back, a judge ordered the Trump administration to at least partially fund SNAP for the month of November anyway. They were going to do so, but then went back on that. And then a lawsuit was filed. A judge then ordered the Trump administration to fully fund SNAP. The deadline was today. Then today comes and the Trump administration files an emergency appeal with the Supreme Court. They do this in order to get out of fully funding SNAP, at least temporarily. The Supreme Court granted it. Now, before the Supreme Court made this decision today, there were states that said that they had worked to make sure that their SNAP recipients would have access to their funds first thing on Friday. So there are recipients who live in these states who did receive November SNAP funding. But because of the Supreme Court ruling today, at least for now, people who live in these states will not receive funding after November, and those who do not live in these states will continue as normal. They will have to wait until the government reopens to get any funding.
So I shut everything down for an hour or two tonight to hang out with MJ, And I came back online and found out that the Trump administration appealed the food stamp ruling, the SNAP ruling, all the way to the Supreme Court. They went to the Supreme Court to say, don't make us spend this money to feed the hungriest people in this country. I just had to come back on here and tell you that in case you didn't know, because that to me is perhaps the most insane thing I have ever heard in my life. I already did a video today about the fact that they appealed this ruling to the First Circuit, but now they've gone to the Supreme Court because they're so indignant. They're so angry that a court is trying to force them to spend money on the neediest people in our country. Let alone $40 billion to Argentina, no problem. $3.5 trillion in tax cuts for the very wealthiest people and the biggest corporations, the Exxons, the Amazons in our country, no problem. Ballroom, $300 million and counting, no problem. Trump parties at Mar-a-Lago and in the White House, no problem. But to the Supreme Court for the SNAP ruling, because how dare you ask the government to spend 1 penny of its money on the poor, the struggling, and the needy, and this from an administration that sells Bibles with this president's name on them. This is insanity. Tell everybody you know. Make sure they know. People are not following the news. Tell them that the Trump administration is going to the Supreme Court to beg them for relief from this ruling. Because that is the only kind of relief they understand, is the relief that frees them from the obligation to think about anybody who is needier than them. Shame on them.
The Supreme Court of the United States is allowing an appeal so that the federal government doesn't immediately have to pay SNAP benefits to people who qualified for SNAP benefits. The money is in an account, a contingency account, $5 billion for emergency situations just like this. And the Supreme Court of the United States of America just said, you don't need to turn on those payments just yet. Let's draw it out. This shit is fucking wild, dude.
So after Trump is ordered to pay for food stamps for people for the month of November because they're using it as a bargaining chip during the government shutdown, the Trump administration instead says, hey, Supreme Court, if you can help us block this order by 9:30 p.m. tonight, which is in about a few hours Eastern time, a couple hours actually, then, we won't have to pay people SNAP benefits, even though we're on day 37 of a government shutdown and we're almost 10 days into the month of November. So I can't imagine how people are making do without their SNAP benefits if they desperately need it, which 42 million Americans do. Brooke Rollins, Secretary of Agriculture, which is part of the Trump administration, against the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, which is from the judge that issued the paying of the SNAP benefits, is now going to the Supreme Court of the United States. Midas Touch originally posted, Americans are finally starting to receive their SNAP benefits. Trump is rushing to the Supreme Court to try to ensure those people starve. Insane. Hopefully this doesn't affect people who are just trying to find their next meal. You can follow for more, but you don't have to.
Breaking news from the Supreme Court. They have ruled in favor of the Trump administration blocking SNAP food benefits. But here's why this might be a long-term political gain for the Democrats. Hear me out on this. This ruling came down just about a half hour ago from the Supreme Court, granting the administration's appeal to temporarily block a federal court order from a Rhode Island judge that ordered the administration to fully fund SNAP payments for November during the government shutdown. Now, here's why I think this might be a short-term political win for Trump, but a long-term political gain for the Democrats. This ruling came from Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of the court's liberal justices. Now, she stepped in because she handles emergency matters for the state of Massachusetts. That's where the first district court is, the appeals court that Trump and his lawyers appealed to. Now, they declined to immediately hear the case and intervene. That's why she stepped in to allow that to fully take place. And she even gave the administration an extra 48 hours to appeal after that ruling came down. So basically she's like, okay, go to the appellate court and give all your reasons. I want to hear all your reasons. I think the whole world wants to hear all your reasons. And once that's fully documented and they want to appeal again, this time likely again to the Supreme Court when they lose, that's going to be really interesting, because then it won't be Justice Jackson being the only one deciding. It will have to be likely the full Supreme Court bench.